My African identity. Many characteristics come together to qualify human beings as what they are. Thus, a monkey cannot be considered a human being simply because it has a head. Neither can a kangaroo be considered human because it has two legs. By physical parameters, before anything can be considered a human being, it must have a head, skin, two arms, two legs, a nose, a pair of eyes, a mouth, hair, and a chest, to mention but a few. A living thing that possesses all these physical things is most likely a human being. There are situations where one or two of these things may be absent for one reason or the other, but an absence like that does not disqualify one as a human being. However, the presence of one of these alone is not enough to qualify anything as human. Just like one thing is not enough to identify anything as human, one thing is not enough to identify a human being as African. My name is Donikia Komdu. And even though I've not explicitly mentioned that I'm African, I'm sure that you already assume from my name that I am. Our names are a great part of our identity, and undeniably, names like Atidiga, Nkrumah, Getuba, and Binyavanga sound African. But is it the sound of my name that identifies me as African? If so, does it mean that Africans who have surnames that sound Western like Peters, Taylor, and Rawlings are not African? I believe that the answer to this question is no, and from this, I guess we could conclude that one's name alone is not enough to identify them as African. But if you had seen me before I mentioned my name, the color of my skin would have most probably been the basis for you to assume that I'm African. This is because I'm a dark-skinned girl. The melanin in my skin is evident and striking. It is beautiful, a sentiment shared by the author of Songs of Solomon. Because the majority of black-skinned people are Africans, it is very easy for people to assume that all people with black skin are African. But if the color of my skin is what identifies me as African, what would happen if I were an African whose skin lacked that much melanin? Would that disqualify me as a citizen of the continent? Am I only African because my skin is dark? Does a dark-skinned Jamaican qualify to be African simply because of his or her skin color? The answer to these questions is a simple no. And here too, we can agree that my skin alone cannot identify me as African. If you ever step into an African kitchen, you will come across some meals that I cannot survive without. My fufu and apochin kwakwa, akle and fetudechi, togafi and ayoyo soup, or the meal that is causing the most chaos in the world, jollof rice. These meals are a part of my blood, and nothing can take their place. A bottle of Coke or a cocktail is good enough to seemingly quench my taste, but nothing refreshes me more than a calabash of chilled pito, sobolo or asana on a hot afternoon. These drinks seem to have a connection with my nervous system. They work the magic of calming my brain in a way that nothing else does. I know without a doubt that non-Africans will face a struggle when dealing with the spicy taste of sobolo or the slight harshness in the taste of African alcohol in pito. A calabash of asana is possibly the most a non-African can deal with because of its heavenly sweetness. But I love pizza. It is also a meal that I cannot survive without. There are also non-Africans who love African meals so much so that they would rather not go without it for a week. The case of identity is same here too. My connection to African food cannot stand on its own to identify me as African because there are some non-African meals that I love as much. My hair could possibly be the strongest placeholder on a list of things that can stand on their own to identify me as African. This is because, of all 7 continents of the world, natural hair with a nature like mine can only be found on the African continent. African hair is kinky and usually black or brown in color. Unlike most hair types, my afro does not descend to my feet when it grows. It reaches high towards the sky. African hair is unique. It has a relatively slow growth rate, but even 20 minutes is more than enough time for all of it to be shaved off. Should I base my African identity on my hair? What happens when my hair gets shaved? Do I become unqualified as an African while I'm hairless? I got the chance to live on a different continent for a while. Upon my arrival, the first thing I noticed was a difference in the color of my skin. In the part of the world that I came from, most people had dark skin. I say most because there were some people who had relatively lighter colored skin as compared to the masses. But I had never seen the color of my skin as unique until I was abroad. The people abroad had nude colored skin and pupils that varied in color. There were pupil colors like blue, green and grey, in addition to the brown and black that I had been used to all my life. The next difference I had to deal with was accent. The people in this country spoke with a slur that required me to pay rapt attention in order to grasp what was being said. And to be fair, I have to state that they did same when listening to me. We pronounce words differently, and the breaks we took when speaking were different. I was particularly shocked at the way greetings were done in this place. Where I come from, it is seen as brutally disrespectful to greet anybody, especially those older than you, with your left hand. We even squat a little when greeting to show respect, but in this place, people just said hellos and highs, or what I considered worst, waved at each other when greeting. Also, none of the people in this place bore the names that I was used to from home, and the meals that were served were different from what we ate at home. These are but a handful of the differences I observed. The many differences I came across made me realize that my identity as an African stands in many things. My hair, skin color, food, and accent, amongst other things, cannot stand on their own to identify me as African. I'm African because of more things than one. My African hair is beautiful, but if I choose to shave all of it off and go bald, I will still be African. Yes, I am black and beautiful. The melanin in my skin is radiant, but if my skin lacked melanin, I would still be African. I cannot survive a long period without African food, but my addiction to pizza is not enough to make me Italian. My African identity is not tied to one thing alone. It is in the combination of the sound of my African name, the nature of my hair, the color of my skin, and my accents, amongst others, that my African identity is hidden. These individual things come together to make me African.